The first thing I felt was the stillness and unexpected hush in the air that made the moment feel heavier, richer, as if the world had paused just long enough for me to breathe in a different version of myself. At 52, I had grown used to moving quietly through my own routines. But I hadn't expected a single afternoon to shift the rhythm of my life. Yet there I was, standing in my garden, watching a young man named Callum step through my gate. And something inside me stirred with a whisper of possibility I hadn't felt in years. For most of my life, beauty had been something loud, something people commented on, something others noticed before I even knew how to interpret it. But age had softened everything. My body, my pace, my expectations. I often told myself that time didn't steal beauty. It reshaped it into something quieter, deeper, almost secret. Still, I had never expected someone else to notice those secrets, especially someone 30 years younger. But when Callum arrived, sunlight catching on the strands of his hair, he looked at me with a politeness so warm it unsettled me. "Good afternoon, Madame Vivienne," he said, the title sitting like an invisible distance between us. Yet his tone held a softness that closed that distance in ways neither of us acknowledged. I had asked his mother, an old friend of mine, to send him over to help repair my pergola. Nothing more. I expected a simple visit, a bit of work, maybe a thank you afterward. But as I led him through the garden, explaining what needed to be done, I felt my voice shift. Growing strangely aware of his presence, Callum listened carefully, his eyes steady but never intrusive. Every time I pointed to a cracked beam, his breath brushed the air between us, light and warm. I caught the scent of fresh soap lingering on his skin. A detail I should not have noticed and yet couldn't forget. He moved with an easy confidencion, but grounded, hand-skilled, and sure. And for a moment I felt the years between us fold inward, not disappearing but becoming softer, less sharp. When our eyes met, his hold lingered a heartbeat too long. Just enough to make me aware of the way my heart shifted inside my chest. I didn't understand why it affected me. Not then. I only knew that something inside me, something long dormant, had begun to breathe again. That evening, after he left, I stood by the window longer than necessary. The garden had never looked particularly magical, but that day it felt touched by something unfamiliar. My reflection in the glass startled me. A spark had returned to my eyes, fragile but unmistakably alive. It frightened me, thrilled me, confused me. I told myself it was nothing, a passing moment, a trick of light. But when I opened my planner the next morning and saw that I had unconsciously written Callum Pergola, I realized the moment had stayed with me longer than I intended. Days passed before his next visit, yet anticipation found small ways to settle into my routine. I brushed my hair with a touch more care, chose a softer blouse, even lingered near the window without admitting to myself why. When he finally appeared again, offering that same gentle smile, something inside me softened in a way I wasn't ready to examine. "Good afternoon, Madame Vivienne," he said, again respectful calm. My heart, betraying all sense and reason, fluttered like it had forgotten its age. I told myself I would stay measured, distant, unaffected. But as he worked, I found my gaze drifting toward him, studying the focus in his expression, the quiet patience in his hands. He didn't rush, didn't cut corners. He approached every task as if it deserved attention, which startled me more deeply than I expected. I had spent years living for others, caring, organizing, managing. Somewhere along the way, I had forgotten what it felt like for someone to simply be present near me, fully and without expectation. Later, when he asked me to hold a beam steady, I stepped closer. Our hands brushed light, fleeting, but the warmth of that touch lingered long after I moved away. It wasn't a romantic spark, not in the usual sense. It felt more like a quiet reminder that I was still human, still capable of feeling something beyond routine. That night, the memory of that brief contact slipped into my thoughts as I lay awake. I found myself replaying the moment, wondering why it mattered so much, why it refused to fade like ordinary encounters usually did. Soon, I began noticing small changes in myself. I paid attention to my clothing again, to the way I arranged my hair, to the soft hum of anticipation that stirred whenever his visits approached. I hated the vanity of it, loved it, resented it, leaned into it. I told myself it wasn't about him, that it was simply about rediscovering myself. But deep down, I knew that part of this awakening came from the way his eyes sometimes lingered on me. Quick glances he hid behind polite smiles. There were moments when he looked away too quickly, as if embarrassed by something unspoken. Other times he seemed unaffected, humming lightly as he worked. That uncertainty, the not knowing what he felt or whether he felt anything at all lonely, drew me deeper into my own thoughts. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself it was a harmless fascination. But the more I resisted, the stronger it grew, as if emotion had taken root in places I'd forgotten existed. One evening, I asked him to check a loose part of the fence, a task small enough to be unnecessary, but I made the request anyway. When he arrived, the warm golden light of dusk cast a soft glow across the garden. "You really didn't have to come today," I told him, though the quickened beat of my heart betrayed me. He shook his head gently. "I didn't mind," he said. And something quiet passed between Usa's silent acknowledgement that neither of us dared name as he worked. I watched him move with that same careful intention. Something about his presence awakened old parts of me, the parts that once found joy in tending to small things, in noticing beauty in the ordinary. The pergola, the fence, the garden, they were all simply wood and leaves. But with him there, they felt alive in a new way. Or maybe it was me who felt alive again. That night, sleep eluded me. Every sound in the house seemed amplified, as if my senses had awakened alongside my emotions. I kept wondering what this feeling was. Not love, certainly. Not desire in its reckless form. It was something softer, something dangerous in its subtlety. A recognition. A longing not for him, but for the version of myself that had reawakened in his presence. The days that followed felt strangely weightless. I tried to distract myself, rearranging furniture, cleaning rooms that didn't need cleaning, but memories of him, of his smile, of the peaceful rhythm he carried, kept weaving themselves back into my thoughts. One afternoon, I found myself writing against sentences that didn't form stories, just fragments of feeling. Thoughts about how one person unintentionally can stir an entire lifetime of silence inside another. When Callum returned a few days later, he greeted me with that familiar half-smile. The fence still holding, he teased lightly. "More than holding," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Your work lasts longer than most professionals." He laughed softly, brushing off the compliment, and the sound filled the air with warmth. We shared coffee afterward, a simple conversation about music, plants, his studies. Nothing remarkably in, yet it felt effortless, unforced. Free in a way adulthood rarely allowed, but freedom often carries a cost. After he left, the silence of my house felt heavier than before, settling around me like a reminder of everything I had forgotten to feel. I realized then how fragile emotional boundaries could be. You think they are solid until someone crosses them without meaning to. I feared what was happening, not because it was wrong, but because it awakened a part of me that longed to feel seen, desired, alive. For weeks his visits grew less frequent. I told myself it was better that way. But every time my eyes drifted toward the repaired pergola or the fence, a quiet ache unfurled inside me. It wasn't longing for him, at least, not entirely. It was longing for the sense of presence he had returned to my life. One evening, as I walked through the garden alone, the fading roses releasing their last breaths of scent, I understood the truth. It wasn't Callum who unsettled me. It was the awakening of a version of myself I thought I had lost. A woman capable of feeling deeply, of hoping, of wanting more than routine. And just as that realization settled within me, my phone buzzed. Callum's name lit the screen. A simple message. A gentle check-in. But the warmth behind those few words slipped into me like a spark reigniting a flame I thought had burned out long ago.